Hello, this is Michael Hexter. Welcome to Politics 2100 here on YouTube. So this episode I'm calling the struggle over quote unquote specialness in US politics, right and left. So this is I think my second attempt to try to explain what I mean about this particular dimension of US politics. But I think it's a very deep psychological slash political it's part of the motivational core of much of the politics we're seeing today, and it is a offshoot of the episode I did about woke identitarianism, and but it's kind of looking at it from a more basic emotional level. So if you can just for a moment imagine that people have unconscious motivations, okay, that are, but also that are not too hard to uncover by someone like me talking about them, or at least to touch upon, let's say, not necessarily uncover, and they may not be so deep down, but there are things that are a little bit embarrassing, okay, and people don't want to think of themselves as being somewhat childish, actually, and childlike in their adult lives. And we're seeing, and I have, as a political opponent of the right wing, I have called them in some way childish and childlike, and they are, and they act in an entitled manner, like spoiled children, big babies, okay, and in some sense, Donald Trump is kind of the signature big baby, or the object of identification for a whole millions and millions of Americans who feel like they have been deprived of their privileges, and they are looking to see in Donald Trump some kind of revenge, either some form of revenge, in other words, just to sort of to kind of turn the table over, just sort of go and say, none of this works, none of this works for me. I'm going in and I'm just, if I'm losing at cards, I just go in and I flip the table over and I say, you can't play anymore because I just flipped the table over. And that's kind of the destructive part of the Trump appeal, and to many right-wing Americans, and or let's say right-wing, and many of them are white, middle class, working class, male and female, okay, and but who feel like, and this is where I come to this idea of specialness. They feel like their special place in America is under threat. And I think that that's helpful to understand that this specialness is something that they didn't realize was special. So in a way, it's kind of embarrassing for them, because it's specialness is, to sort of take a step back and say, specialness is a basic emotional. It's related to narcissism, okay, and there's both a normal and sort of pathological extreme form of thinking about specialness and everything. But in any way, so as children and then as adults, especially in either close friendships or more likely in love relationships, we want to feel a sense of specialness to our people around us, and so forth and so on, and we want to feel like they, in some way or another, recognize that we have something in us, whether it's about us, something that's about us, that makes us unique, that makes us or dear to them in some way or another, and even though the word special sounds embarrassing, and you can think of exaggerated sort of cooing over someone and attentiveness to someone, and that would be, to think about it as an adult, kind of embarrassing that you really want that kind of thing. But people, even into their adulthood, want that, and they seek it out often in their love relationships and other close relationships with people. And but also some of that on a grand scale in politics, people choose political leaders and political flavors in part because how it makes them feel. And this is actually not, it's not great that people do this in the sense that people are bypassing their rational minds, and they're bypassing the concrete benefits, a calculation in a way of what are the benefits that some politician is going to confer on them in terms of their policy, and so to think about rationally about policy and not so much about individual politicians who manipulate emotions. And the manipulation of emotions is how the right wing has become so radical and so far right wing and neo-fascist entity, because they have fabricated controversies, they fabricated, and they continue to spin those out to create fear, to stir up fear and anger in their base, and their base wants to feel that fear and anger. So it's partly, the base is not only a victim in this. They are choosing, but also they are, at the same time, they're living in a manipulated world where the leaders are continually twisting their perception of reality to create a certain set of emotions, including fear, anger, envy, and resentment. And so this lost specialness that so Make America Great Again is about lost specialness, okay? And so and that I perceive, or I think that, for instance, when Trump does his long rallies and so forth and so on, what he is garnering, what he's creating in that environment, and what makes him a political talent, even though he is rather unintelligent in some ways, but also he has, as I've said in other videos, he has a certain kind of interpersonal intelligence. I wouldn't call it an emotional intelligence, because that's sort of a kind of a grab bag of different ends, very kind of complementary to say that someone has that, but he has an interpersonal intelligence that is manipulative, that he sees what people want, and he then tries to give them a simulacrum, or a decoy version, a false version, but still an imaginary version of what he perceives them as wanting, and he sees that they want this sense of specialness, among other things, that he creates in his rallies and so forth and so on. But anyway, this is where this need and this feeling, what I am perceiving as this insatiable need, or this almost insatiable need of these many adults to feel the return of this feeling of feeling special, is in a way a response to the way the Democratic Party has evolved, and also in terms of concrete policies has really decimated parts of the United States through, among other things, now with the help of Republicans in Congress, but still under the Clinton administration, through NAFTA, basically cutting the livelihood out from under many communities. And then furthermore, under Barack Obama, bailing out the banks rather than bailing out homeowners. So this happened again and again. The Democratic Party has created, even though, again, pretending to be a sham caring, pretending to be the party that cares about the ordinary person, the party of the people, that they have hurt many people, also of multi-ethnic, multiracial, but ordinary people. But the people who felt most special and who had most to lose in, let's say, 1990 or 1985, were white people in suburbs and in rural areas, and who were doing relatively well, and throughout American history. They may have moved around, but that they had privilege, and some they were, in terms of our caste system, doing somewhat better, even though some of these people were not at all. They're not the ruling class, and they're not. Most of them are not rich. Okay, but they have gotten throughout American history a sense, I would say a false sense, but a sense but with some real benefits, of being superior, and therefore to black people, to Mexican people, to other people who are othered in various ways, who look different and who are considered to be, quote unquote, not real American in the sense of, even though they are as American as these people, the right wing, or the potential future right wing base. But anyway, this sense of feeling like their specialness has been taken away, and in concrete ways. It's not just in feeling. In other words, these policies actually did undermine the basis of the livelihoods of some of the people who are more marginally holding on, okay, within the more privileged group in terms of the racial caste system of white supremacy. And so, anyway, so that is, within that, simultaneous to that, we have outside the socialist left, outside basically Bernie Sanders and the very, very small socialist left that really was either marginal to the Democratic Party or, outside the Democratic Party, there were most of the left, the liberal left or the progressive left, was focused on issues of identity, of issues of basically, women's oppression, the oppression of black people, the oppression of Latinx people, so forth and so on, and their disadvantages, or that they've experienced, and also violence that the differential treatment they've received, which is totally justified in most cases, that in most accusations of discriminatory and oppressive treatment, not in all cases, but in most cases. And so certainly they didn't have the sense of being special, but within the hothouse environment of the Democratic Party, and also the left that developed, that was increasingly concentrated, and still is becoming concentrated in certain urban areas, mostly coastal cities, and some regions of the country, but mostly on the coast, a little bit around Chicago, so forth and so on. That anyway, in certain Rust Belt cities beside Chicago as well. But anyway, that group, developed its own subculture, which also was very influential. This woke, what I call woke identitarian politics, that this subculture that where political actors no longer perceived the mistakes that the Democrats made, the enormous blows that the Democrats landed on, along with Republicans also landed blows as well, and they also, but some of the critical steps, or let's say the most jarring and hatred inducing steps were done by Democrats, and Democrats who were neoliberal in their orientation. So this is also a story about neoliberalism and they were swept up into these economic ideas that were about free markets and so forth and so on, and also about meritocracy, that somehow that it was they were in a already almost in a post-racial America where it's all about how smart you are or how hardworking you are, and how you can, through a meritocratic, often through education, you can achieve, comfortable middle class or even, a very high status. And it doesn't matter who you are, in the sense of, you can be from any background. Okay. And this became this kind of this individualistic, meritocratic culture, or at least the ideal of that, or the notion that was the way we were heading. It also jarred with these, or that the main apostles of these things in American politics were people who also took these major blows, landed these major blows onto the somewhat comfortable but not really comfortable white middle class and working class, and who were some of the victims of neoliberal policy. Some of them, again, not all of them, but anyway. So this disconnect between the supposed party of the people and their rhetoric created this opportunity into which, Rush Limbaugh sort of, and not just Rush Limbaugh, but right-wing talk radio was already working on this. I mean, Nixon, it goes back to Nixon and goes back to, Pat Buchanan, who was one of Nixon's advisors, but it just that they recognized this way to divide people and create a base for the right wing, and they worked hard on it, and but the Democrats, the Democratic leadership, Clinton and Obama, basically stepped into it, and there was a culture surrounding them where there are people who don't see how terrible these policy decisions were, that then created the environment where a neo-fascist can step in, and or a fascist, or even an old-style fascist, but but a neo-fascist can step in and create a populist movement of people who are feel robbed, and can and also feel like that the Democratic Party is conferring specialness on people of color and on women to some degree or whatever, but just not us. Okay, so in other words, that we are no longer the object of we being the white working class or whatever it is. We are no longer the object of special attention, or at least they are differentially attending the parents, whatever it is. Again, sorry to psychologize this so much, but the government parent is focusing its policy, and this starts in the 1960s, with anti-poverty policies, so forth and so on, and affirmative action. Okay, which is, it's important to have affirmative action, but it's never clearly alone. These politics, a politics that only focuses on that assumes that the rest of the United States is doing just fine, and therefore all we have to do is just bring up these the culture of poverty idea, or that is still common, but was more was elaborated in the 1960s, and just that somehow, and it was, the United States in the 1960s was quite a wealthy place, and quite a relatively egalitarian place, and it was true that people on minimum wage jobs could survive on that and could afford rent and so forth and so on, or certainly in blue collar jobs they could support an entire family, a single breadwinner. So there was a relative a relative, in terms of relative equality, income equality, in the 1960s and 50s no longer exists, and so basically, as this system fell apart, throughout the late 70s, 80s, 90s, the assumption of this politics of focusing on government policy on only the most oppressed, or the most the poorest, or whatever, that that assumption fell away, that it's like, oh, everyone else is doing just fine in the private economy, and we don't really need to have universal policies like Medicare for all and so forth and so on. We can just do Medicare for seniors, and so child, basically, a AFDC, which was welfare. It's not in Germany. They have something called Kindergeld, so which is open to anybody. So literally, any child, any family can get money for. It's a pro-natalist policy. It's helping support children when they're young, and there's not at least a very rigorous income requirement for that, and so the focusing of policy on a certain group created the perception over time, and this was massaged, and even in the 1970s and whatever, when things were still, there was lots of crises in the 1970s, and the system of the 50s and 60s was already falling apart, but there was still some leeway. It wasn't nearly as stark a situation as it's become, in terms of the decreasing buying power of median wages and so forth and so on. And so anyway, so the idea that government and the Democratic Party in particular were so focused on and creating a specialness around or creating this circle of in people who have certain characteristics, certain biological characteristics that appear to be, that are the inverting, as I was saying in the woke identitarian episode about woke identitarianism, that it was an inversion of the hierarchy of white supremacy. So basically, instead of saying the whites were special, we're saying people of color are special, and whites are not special at all. And so that created, in some sense, this seething anger in people who were also there is a sense of entitlement. You see the enormous entitlement of some of these people, but it's partly it's due to decades of neglect. Okay, decades and decades of neglect, because the Democratic Party embraced neoliberalism and embraced austerity, and created and that in the time of need created in people who were saying, well, no, you're prejudiced against us. We're not, think other people are special to us, and then are more special than we are. So you're paying attention to their needs and not to our needs. So we have then dueling politics of who is special, okay, and who is, and the radical right, or just the right wing, or conservatives, or whatever you want to call them, have continually harvested this political resentment over and over and over again, and it's based on a policy architecture, and also a political architecture that went to justify that policy architecture, that creates this sense of resentment. And so one of the main political tasks of progressives and people is to have a policy suite and an approach to politics that diminishes the sense of the resentment, the seething anger, the anger that is turned into, in the most extreme forms, suicidality, where people are martyring themselves in the face of the COVID pandemic, to the idea that that the government or in this case basically the government public health effort is entirely bankrupt, and COVID doesn't really exist, and they're very, very open to anything that suggests to them that this pandemic is not, that we can't work together to contain it, and so forth and so on. It's real, and you have to make some sacrifices, and so forth and so on. They are so enraged that they do things that are again either homicidal or suicidal with regard to either getting sick themselves or also spreading the illness to other people who could potentially die from it. And because to them the whole idea of a group effort led by government, a cooperative effort, is to them is a concession to this hated group of people, the liberals that they're always trying to, almost all right-wing politics trying to make the liberals cry, make them make them hurt, make them and prove them wrong, and show that they're they're bad in some sense or other, and that effort is own the libs. I'm sorry, I'm searching for but to own the libs, to use the online terminology, and so that is. They're trying to take revenge, and one of the ways they try to take revenge, sometimes like a child will do, is they'll hold their breath, and turn blue, okay, and so and we see the equivalent of this in some of the COVID, anti-COVID, anti-mask, hardcore activists, and so forth and so on. So anyway, the going forward, so policy and politics need to be constantly focusing on creating this universalistic, inclusive policy that is about helping everybody, or as many people as possible, in an inclusive, large, big tent, working class, small business, middle class, that is the people, let's call them, and helping support them, and helping them prosper, and helping and getting and addressing injustices within their among people, and among their racism and sexism and so forth and so on, but also the extreme exploitation and extreme power that the billionaires have accumulated by capturing government and capturing not just billionaires, multi-millionaires, centi-millionaires as well, in capturing the apparatus of government. And so anyway, so this inclusive program of inviting people in, and also having policies that are have an open door to people in need overall, people who are who need the support and help of government, and also decommodifying many aspects of American life that are now commodified. So that's I think the task that we have facing us, and I think some people intuitively are working their way into it. I think AOC intuits it. To some degree, Bernie Sanders intuits it, or yeah, I mean, he does. To some degree, I have some criticisms of his political positioning over the last several years, but he is also some of the inspiration for what I'm talking about. But anyway, so but always I think about, you know, how are people in pursuit of this lost specialness, and what is it that we can do uh, to talk down people who are so bent on revenge that they are willing to hurt themselves and hurt other people. So anyway, so I think I will probably return to this at some other point in time, but I hope this introduction of this, using the word specialness and talking about not just the word but the concept, is helpful in your thinking about U.S. politics. And let me know some of your reactions and, you know, criticisms or whatever you have in the comments. And also, if you like the video, please like it. And if you're liking or you're enjoying the content on Politics 2100, please subscribe. And I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Thanks.